Christian parenting.
Aloha, friends. Welcome to the Boy Mom Podcast, powered by Christian Parenting. I am Monica Swanson, mom to 4 boys, podcast host, and author of Boy Mom, What Your Son Needs Most from You. Here on the podcast, it's my goal to bring you practical advice and biblical wisdom for raising boys in this sometimes crazy world. You can always find show notes over at monicaswanson.com/podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
All of the things that I was reaching for and grabbing onto, and even though those are good things, those things were never intended to satisfy us and to tell us who we are and what our value is. In this journey, my biggest question was like, who am I? And I think that what I found at the end is that who am I is the secondary question to who is God.
Aloha, friends, and welcome back to the Boy Mom Podcast. I hope you're doing great, and I'm so glad you're here with me today for this really special interview. We get to chat with Emily Lex, who you just heard a short clip from, and many of you probably already know Emily. She's been blogging for years. She does beautiful watercolor. I always think of people like she and Ruth Cho Simons, who are just blessed to have both the gift of art and the gift of writing. It's just like almost not fair because it's just so good, but everything she does is lovely. And I so enjoyed getting to know her. You're going to hear us chat about the fact that Emily lives in my hometown, which a lot of people haven't even heard of, but she lives in Gig Harbor, Washington, which I just love. I will always consider it my home in my heart as well. And so anyway, really fun to share that in common with her and get to have this conversation, which I think you're going to love. And you know, we talk a lot here on the Boy Mom Podcast about our kids, right? Of course we do. We're talking about raising boys, about parenting, about the best resources, things we need to protect our kids from, how we can raise them well. But today we are just shifting gears a little bit. And as Emily shares her story, her journey, I have a feeling that most of us listening are going to hear some of our own story in there as well. So Emily's going to talk about a time in her life that she really went through an identity crisis. And that might sound super dramatic, but when she shares about it, I think if you're like me, you're going to be going, wow, I've had that feeling. I've had those thoughts. But what I love is that Emily courageously walked through a season. That's what it took her to get to the other side where she truly found what it means to live freely and lightly. And don't we all want that? So this conversation really inspired me. I think that Emily just has so much wisdom to share. In fact, as I found the clip to put at the beginning of this episode, I just grabbed clip after clip because there were so many things that Emily said that I was like, oh, I want to put that at the beginning. No, I want to put this, because there were just so many beautiful nuggets. So I hope this is an episode you can slow down, really tune in. Might be a good one for a nature walk or a long drive, but I hope you can take your time to listen and really maybe prayerfully ask what this has for you, where Emily's story might be speaking to your heart, and how God might want to use this to inspire you to walk in faith into the seasons that you have ahead as well. So I'm excited. I do hope that you will go over to show notes as always, where we're going to have links to Emily's awesome book. It is really beautiful, as well as her website and all the other things. Also, I'm going to have some photos of her scripture cards, which are just really beautiful. They have scriptures and little watercolor paintings on each one. I have a set, and they're so great if you're like me and always working on scripture memory. These are great for that, and her children's cards are so good for working with kids too. So again, lots of stuff over in show notes. Be sure to visit at monicaswanson.com/episode 115. That's 115. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to let you listen in as Emily Lex and I chat about what it means to live freely and lightly. I hope this blesses you today. Hey, Emily, welcome to the Boy Mom Podcast.
I love it that I'm here. Thanks for having me.
It is going to be so much fun and such an encouragement, I know, to everyone listening to get to chat with you. And there's so much I want to talk to you about. So before I dive in, could you go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell people where you live and about your family and what you do?
Sure. Okay, my name is Emily. I live in Gig Harbor, Washington, which is just about an hour south of Seattle, and a place that you know well. It's
Hmm.
just a darling little coastal town that we moved to a handful of years ago, and we're so happy here. I have 4 kids, 3 teenage boys, 17, 15, and 13. They eat a lot of food and they're taller than me, and I love them so much more than I ever expected to love teenage boys. And then
Mm.
our daughter is 11 and just a little mini me who wants to be with me all the time. So,
Oh my,
uh,
what a
yeah,
dream.
it is. I wanted 4 girls, and here I am with 3 boys and a girl, and it's actually surprisingly delightful.
Oh, I love it. All right. And tell us what you do. Tell us
Oh,
about your
sure.
work.
Okay, so
Yeah.
for about 10 years, I wrote a blog. It was called Jones Design Company. And the Lord just saw fit to have me pivot a bit in the last several years. So, about 3 years ago, I kind of stopped blogging and transitioned to having it just was time for me to have my own name. And so I switched over to, I have a website called Emily Lex. I didn't really take on the identity of artist until like I'm 42. So it took me
Hmm.
until I was about 40 before I was like, okay,
Mm.
actually, I'm an artist. And so I do watercolor art, and I have written a couple of books. I have a children's book coming out soon. I just published another book. So I feel like I have a second career in my
Mm.
40s, but
I
it's
love
amazing.
that.
Yeah,
I love that. Okay. I need to go back though.
sure.
Clearly, you're an artist. I mean,
Mm.
we're going to be talking about your most recent book, Freely and Lightly, which is just beautiful, stunning, both in the writing and the artwork. But how you must have done art in the past. Like, where did the art thing,
Yes.
how did that grow?
I have always loved art, and I would probably always call myself creative. But my artwork, I think it just didn't look like what I didn't go to art school, and I'm not
Hmm.
formally trained. And the art that I did was a lot, like, especially early on in blogging, it was a lot of crafts and a lot of like, taking book pages and making them into a wreath. And so you just don't really consider that art.
Right.
And
Yes.
um, I don't know. I mean, I've always loved watercolor. When we got married 18 years ago, I watercolored our wedding invitation. So it's always just been something that I've done, but not something that I've leaned into very much.
Right.
And
Hmm.
for some reason, a couple years ago, I just was after kind of going through a massive like, who am I? Who is God? What is my identity? It's the story of what is in Freely and Lightly. And at the end of it, I sat on my closet floor. I tell this story in the book, but I sat on my closet floor and I'm like, okay, Lord, you have healed me from so much anxiety and insecurity. I now know that I am enough because you say that I'm enough. What am I supposed to do? and and
Mm.
what I kind of heard in
Ah,
my spirit is be an artist. And I don't think that that was like incongruent with what I knew of myself, but it just was this moment of like, don't just do art, but be an artist. And what does it mean to be an artist? And I think for me, that meant, first of all, practicing art. So doing
mm-hmm.
art and like
Yep.
being
Mm-hmm.
active in it.
Sure.
And so I decided I started doing a watercolor a day. I committed, it actually started on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2019. I woke up in the morning and all of a sudden I was like, I think I should paint every day this year. And so
So cool.
for
Wow.
365 days, I painted every day. And many of those paintings are what is filled the pages of Freely and Lightly. So that's kind of amazing.
Ah,
But
ah.
then the other part I think of being an artist for me is just this like paying attention to what is to the just the ordinary mundane things and finding beauty in those and then capturing that and somehow just it's just like having eyes to see. I think that's what being an artist is, and I think we all are that, and then we display it in all of our different ways, but all of us are kind of called to see the beauty and the goodness that's in the world and in creation, and then and delight in that. And so I think that that's kind of
Mm.
what he was
Oh
calling
my
me to, is like,
goodness.
be an artist, Emily. That is who you are. So
That is
that was a very
so awesome.
long-winded story, but there you
No,
go.
it was so good because I do think that there's a lot of people listening because I hear from women all the time and I love that part of your story is that this kind of happened a little bit later, relatively speaking. And that's so much of my story. I mean, I was 40 years old when I started blogging,
Mhm.
and that also was, 10 years ago. And so I love that you hit that place in life where it was like, okay, I'm ready for the next thing. And being able to look back now and see how God prepared you, see that you were kind of doing the work for a long time, at least observing and taking note and, honing your skills. But I just think that there's going to be people out there encouraged to
Mhm.
know that if you're a young mom, if you're in the thick
Mhm.
of it and you're just thinking, oh, what is there for me? Do I have
Mhm.
something? Yes. I think
Mhm.
God's given us all gifts and talents, and sometimes it's a matter of timing. And so your advice is great. Be observing, be looking around, and maybe taking some notes. And oh, that is so encouraging. I love it.
Good. Good.
I'm so glad you did what you did, and I love your
Mhm.
style of art. It's beautiful. It's just
Thank you.
so, yeah, it is so good. Well, okay, so many things. Gig Harbor, you and I already chatted, but for those listening, let me just have a quick moment here because Gig Harbor is my hometown. And next time I'm in Gig Harbor, Emily and I are definitely going to have coffee and
Yes.
maybe walk the harbor. But
Yes.
we were just chatting about this little place because oftentimes people will say, or I will say, when people ask where I'm from, I'm like, oh, the Pacific Northwest or a small
Mhm.
town south of Seattle. And my mom's always like, call it Gig Harbor. What's wrong with just, we've got
Right.
pride. Gig Harbor is a special place. So everyone
Okay.
who can get to the Pacific Northwest, if you can visit Gig Harbor, it is a darling town. My roots go way back there. So if you're going to go, be sure to reach out, message me, because I'll tell you a little bit more about my history.
Mhm.
But I just love where you live, and I try to get there at least once a year. So we're going to meet there, and as we record, hopefully we'll be meeting in Hawaii even sooner. So
I
that's
know,
kind of
because I
fun.
love where you live, so we're gonna come visit.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the ideal world would be, a place here and a place there. And what's funny
Totally.
you'll appreciate is that my boys who, surfer boys love everything tropical. If you asked my son Luke his favorite place in the world, and he's traveled a lot of cool places, he would say Washington. He loves going to visit grandma and grandpa. He loves their
Yeah.
cabin at the mountain, the
Yeah.
cozy cabin. And so, yeah, that's a really special place. Okay, so we could
It
Gig Harbor
is.
out all day. Love where you live, and I'm sure you have lots of inspiration there because it is
Yes.
just so beautiful. But I want to talk now about this new book that I'm holding in my hands, Freely and Lightly: God's Gracious Invitation to a Life of Quiet Confidence. And I'm going to just tell you that I have read through it really slowly, and I am. How do I say this? I'm convicted, perhaps, like, okay, I need this. This is something that I need a whole lot more of. So, why don't you start by just telling us the inspiration? How did this book get started?
Oh, let me read to you really quick, just from the beginning. It's the scripture that the whole book is based off of, and I think that that is a good place to start. So, for those of you who are familiar with maybe like the NIV version, it's the part in Matthew where Jesus is saying, "Come to me, anyone who is weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." And when I read it in the Message version, for some reason, this language just really resonated kind of with where my heart was. So let me read it real quick. It's Matthew 11:28 through 30 in the Message translation. Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. So,
Mm.
obviously, that's where we got the title from.
Mm.
And it really is just this promise that in a world and a culture um, that applauses hustle and self effort and just kind of sets us up for figuring out what is the good life to us and then going after those things. I did all of that, and I had everything that I could have ever imagined, with a husband and kids and a pretty house and a blog following, and yet for some reason, even within all of those good things, I was still dissatisfied and anxious and insecure in ways that, like, I felt like there's no reason for this. There's no reason for me to be
Mm.
insecure. Why am I like this? And for years and years, I just sat in that place of like, I think that I should be able to get over this. And then finally realizing that all of the things that I was reaching for and grabbing onto, and even though those are good things, those things were never intended to satisfy us and to tell us who we are and what our value is. And so this story is just the journey of God kind of waking me up, I think, to the ways, and I hope that it's an invitation to the reader also to recognize,
Sure.
like, oh
For
man,
sure.
I kind of fall into that too. But waking
yeah.
me up to the things that are tripping me up and where I'm searching for significance and identity, even good places, but they were not made to tell me who I am. And so it's just like reorienting and learning to take those thoughts captive and learn who Jesus actually says I am. And kind of the curious thing about the whole thing is that in this journey, my biggest question was like, who am I? And I think that what I found at the end is that who am I is the secondary question to who is God? And can I trust him? And if I can trust him to tell me who I am, then I'm free. Then I can live freely and lightly. And so it really all just boils down to, do I trust God? What kind of God do I serve? So that is what this journey is about.
Oh, it's beautiful. For somebody who's wired like
Mm,
me,
mm,
man, you can't hear this message too many times because it's
right.
really hard to even be honest with myself sometimes, I think, to say, how am I defining myself? How am how do I see myself? And so what I love is that ultimately it does come down to who is God and can I trust him? And can I trust that what he says about me is enough? So I'm telling you, this is important. This is not just a beautiful read, but it's an important read, and I think
Yeah.
it's really a gift. And so, um, I think you kind of alluded to where you were at when you needed to slow down. You already had your 4 kids. You were just almost, I mean, I don't want to call it an identity crisis, but to some extent, I think we all have those.
Mhm.
Um, Tell us what that looked like when you first started to take those steps.
I think what I call it, and I think I already said this a little bit, is that what I want is for God to like slap you across the head in a really nice way and be like, "Hey, it's time for you to figure out what is actually true." But I just don't think that's not how it worked for me. I think maybe some people come to a point where there's like loss or grief or a disruption to their life where they recognize like, oh, maybe I'm holding on to things that aren't, you know, that I could lose. And so maybe those are
Mm-hmm.
not the right things to hold on to. For me, it really was just a very slow waking up. Like it
Yep.
was just this like gentle uncovering um, of maybe sadness that I could easily dismiss because everyone's sad, or I'm too busy to be sad, or everyone compares, and that's just kind of part of what we do. And instead of dismissing that stuff, I feel like God just kept waking me up, waking me up, waking me up to all of these little things of like, do you really want to be bound and heavy, or do you want to be
Mm-hmm.
free and light? And
Mm-hmm.
and so I just feel like it was a really gentle invitation that that came at a time in my life where maybe I was I was just finally ready to hear it, because it was like, okay, I can put nothing else good in my life to try to fill myself up. I'm now at the point where I'm going to start sabotaging and I'm going to start going after things that are not good anymore because the good stuff's
Mm.
not working. So maybe it's some bad stuff that I need to make me feel better about myself.
Totally.
And I think he
Totally.
rescued me from a life where I could have easily destroyed things because that hole in me was so strong. It was so powerful. And I needed attention and affirmation. And I needed things to tell me that I was valuable, that the good stuff wasn't working anymore. And I was going to go after bad stuff. So feels like he
Wow.
rescued me from that. Yeah.
I love that. Well, maybe you could share with us a story that kind of is part of that journey, and that was when you woke up on a bus in Rwanda. Can you tell us that story?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes, I was traveling with a group of amazing women who were, Christian speakers and influencers. And we were in Rwanda with two different organizations that I love dearly. Noonday Collection, which they have artisans around the world that produce jewelry and bags. And so we were in Rwanda visiting that co op of the women who were working they own their own business, but Noonday hires from them. So we were working with those women who I fell in love with and loved so much. And then we were also there with International Justice Mission, which actually it's a I don't know, just an incredible organization that goes into countries and uses the country's resources. So it's the people who actually live in the country who are employed by IJM as lawyers and advocates and counselors to create better justice systems in those countries. And so we were there to kind of support and bring awareness to both of those organizations. And it wasn't a mission trip. It was more of just like, let's kind of take tours and get to know people and share it with our American audiences. And this team was amazing. Every day we would get on a bus and we would go out to do the different events that we went on. And we would always kind of flip-flop seats and get to know each other. And one day I got on the bus first and everyone else got on after me and no one sat next to me. And it was just this, like, I just started crying so hard. And, I think I said it in the book, like I could have really dismissed that as we were dealing with genocide and really difficult things and poverty. And I missed my family. I had been gone for quite a while across the world. So I could have dismissed it as that. And I guess maybe that was the kindness of God to not let me just dismiss it for something that it wasn't actually, because what it actually was me just feeling like, just having these insecurities bubble up and be like, what's wrong with me? Why does no one want to sit next to me? I just felt like a little girl. And then remembering like, oh yeah, as a little girl, I felt that same way. What's wrong with me? Why does no one like me? What's different about me? Am I not interesting enough? Am I too quiet? Like, and just all of those little insecurities that I think we tuck away and just ignore, but there's still narratives that are living in there. And it was just this moment of me going like, okay, I'm not okay. And as much as I want everything to just be fine in my life, and I like, if we're talking about Enneagram, I identify with the peacemaker type 9, who just like, I just want everything to be okay. Just settle everything. Let's not ruffle any feathers. Sure. I don't want any conflict. I just want everything to just be okay. And to then have all of these little moments pop up where like, oh, I'm not okay. I'm not fine. I'm not fine. I'm not fine. It's like very disruptive.
Yeah, sure.
But I do believe that it's just the kindness of God saying, I don't want you to stay fine. That's not how I made my creation. I want you to be, I want life to be abundant and joyful and true peace, not just this like fake under the rug settledness. Oh, so I would say that was one of the first moments of waking up. And then sadly, it took another year. The next story I tell is when I'm sitting on a beach in Hawaii, where then I start asking these big questions. And that was a year later. And so it wasn't just like boom, 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 one after another. It was a slow waking up. It really was.
Well, and I think that's just the kindness of the Lord too, because I think you mentioned the word invitation earlier. And I do think that we all have that invitation. And yet God is such a gentleman in saying, when you're ready, I'm ready to go there with you. And again, just being honest with yourself and maybe someone else is sometimes a really scary thing to do. And so going there with our insecurities, you talk about how, you used to push those insecurities down. Can you kind of tell us practically what it looks like now when because we're all going to live with insecurities the rest of our life, right? And I have these conversations with my boys. And I think that's one important thing as women are listening to know that this isn't just about us, but this is giving us tools and insight that we can then parent our kids better, because this is stuff that we're all going to deal with for a lifetime. So talk to us about what it looks like to deal with insecurities now.
I think that, okay, I think I have so many things to say about this. What do we say?
Talk. We're listening.
I think that I waffle between, and maybe you or your listeners relate to this, between either feeling really awesome and self-righteous and feeling really terrible and insecure. And I actually think that they are the same thing. It's that my eyes are wholly focused on me. And so I think any of the like comparison, for instance, is a trap I fall into regularly. But the thing about comparison, I think what it often gets talked about is that you compare yourself and you always feel worse than the other person. But I think the opposite also happens, where you compare yourself and then you're like, well, I feel better because, like
either way, yes.
My kitchen is prettier than their kitchen, or my body is worse than their body, or whatever. And so we find these places to measure ourselves up and then decide on this hierarchy of what is more valuable. Where do I land on that hierarchy? And so I think that those insecurities and those moments of pride are times when my eyes are just thinking about me. And I think that God would say, take your eyes off of yourself, take your eyes off of other people, just put them on me. And when you just have your eyes focused on God, and you truly trust that what he says about me and what he says about you and what he says about the next person, that's the truth. And no amount of me kind of figuring out where I measure up, that's not true. That's just me putting my own kind of narrative on that story. So I, of course, deal with comparison and insecurity, and that's just a temptation for sure. I just think maybe what I have learned now is to really pay attention to it and name it and say, like, why do I feel insecure? What kind of value am I trying to receive out of this insecurity? What am I trying to learn about myself? And maybe my eyes shouldn't be focused on me. I feel like the Psalms do this all the time, where it starts with like, why have you forsaken me, God? And I have all these enemies around me, and things are so terrible, and you're so horrible. And then all of a sudden it like switches to, but God, you are faithful. And it's like calling out kind of the character of God, but you rescue your people. And then by the end of the Psalm, it's like, they might still have these circumstances that are happening in their life, but their perspective has been changed. Yes. And so I think that's the thing, is like, I still, I have insecurities about my skin. We're going to Hawaii next week, and I do not get tan, and my skin is so pale. And I actually
just sit next to me. We'll be
Are
okay.
you pale? Oh
I am, because my husband's a sunscreen police, so I'm as white as you get.
Well, I am bright pink, because this last weekend I was at my parents' house and I fell asleep in the sun and I got so sunburned. I'm like, I was out there for an hour and I am so pink.
It happens.
And so I have this like insecurity about my skin because it's pale. And no matter what I do, my skin will always be pale. That's just how it is. But do I have to let that assign me value, or can that just be a fact? That can just be a fact that my skin is pale. It doesn't have to tell me that I am more or less valuable. And in this culture that praises bronze skin, I will never be praised for beautiful skin. Right. But I can't change that. It's a fact, but that's okay. It can just stay as a fact. It doesn't have to translate into my value.
Hey friends, hope you're enjoying this conversation, and there is still more yet to come. But I want to pause real quick to tell you that we are excited to let you know that all this week you have the chance to help keep the Boy Mom podcast going strong and encouraging you in your parenting journey. And that's by giving a donation to christianparenting.org. The Boy Mom podcast is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which we like to say has a podcast for every parent. But reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month comes with a cost, which is why I hope you'll give a special donation today. Besides producing podcasts like mine, Christian Parenting also develops books, workbooks, prayer journals, blog resources, and other practical tools to help parents like you become the perfectly imperfect parents God created you to be. Now, I know a lot of you tuned in to the Christian Parenting speaking event this last spring, or perhaps last fall. You guys know that they are doing incredible things, and I am so honored to work with them, and so thankful that they have a producer, a podcast editor and producer, that takes all my messy interviews and cleans them up, puts the music in, and publishes them. So guys, they are a huge help to me, and you can truly support my podcast by supporting Christian Parenting. Now, you can do that in a couple ways. You can simply text message CP Give to the number 474747. That is the letters CP Give to 474747. And you can also give by visiting cpgive.org. They make it really simple, so hop on over to cpgive.org, offer a donation. Just know that Christian Parenting is 100% donor funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So I do hope you'll give a special donation this week to help keep the Boy Mom podcast and Christian Parenting going strong. We only ask a couple times a year, guys, so thanks so much for understanding and for your awesome support. And now we're going to get back to today's conversation with Emily Lex. I hope you enjoy these final few minutes. This is just such important stuff. No, I really do appreciate that. And I think that it's such an inward shift that like it's hard to even have a conversation about, because we all want to just do something to make a shift to do something that, especially if we could do something physically, but really it's turning our heart moment by moment, thought by thought, from catching those thoughts, taking captive our thoughts and turning them to what really matters. And I do believe, I mean, I love to learn about mindset and these things that we do with our brain and the power of our thoughts. So I just think that if we care enough, if we take it seriously enough, we can really take the time to retrain our thoughts and turn them more to God. And how often I wake up in the morning and my first thoughts are, stress, anxiety is about what I have to do that day and I'll never get it all done. But what if we woke up and turned our thoughts habitually day after day to, God, you're so good. Like that perspective can shift everything. So I just think this is super practical. And again, the invitation is there, but it takes some of us longer than others. So
I know. Well, and I think the thing about following Jesus is that maybe I grew up in a time I don't know, maybe I'll just name it as my own experience, where it was like, give your life to Jesus, accept him, and you are going to go to heaven. And like, that's the end goal. And I just kind of wonder, and now maybe I feel like we have missed the point, because I think that Jesus says, yes, trust me with your life, and I want you to live eternally with me. But I also want to transform you right now here on earth as it is right now,
100%.
And that he is with us. And part of that requires practice and just like daily doing some things that will renew our minds. Because I do think that is the hugest part, is like, I remember hearing one time, I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it seems valid, that your brain doesn't know the difference between truth and false. It just knows repetition. Whatever you tell it again and again, that's what it thinks is going to be true.
Yes.
And so I just wonder, like, if we fill our minds with beauty and truth again and again and again, at some point, I think that's what causes this like slow transformation of the heart, is just by like following Jesus daily, like taking our thoughts captive, testing them, like, is this actually what God says of me, or is this what I say of myself? And which one do I think is going to be the one that I want to carry with me? So yeah, it's a daily practice, and it's good. Like, it's so good. And if God is good, then I don't think that he's going to lead us to a place that is unnecessary work. I think
it's good work.
That work is good, and it will create in us this life that is free and light. And I have experienced a little taste of it, and I want that for myself. I want that for my kids, and I want that for everyone I talk to. Like, that's the way I think that Jesus wants us to live, is freely and lightly.
Yes. And he says it throughout scriptures, which I just am so thankful for. Okay. So here in Hawaii, we don't take road trips. We take a trip around the island and then we come home. And so my whole family, we're kind of craving a road trip right now, but I would love for you to tell us a little bit. You talk in the book about a cross-country road trip you took with your family and how that really was a turning point. Can you tell us a little about that?
Sure. We decided, so this was 5 years ago, and I was kind of sort of at the beginning stages of these identity questions. And at that same time, we looked at our family, and this was something that my husband Ryan had been wanting to do for a really long time. Like, who doesn't want to just pack up and go for 4 months and travel? And finally, I agreed to it because I'm I don't know, I like normal and comfort and
Mm-hmm.
settled things. And this was like very adventure-y. But finally I said yes to it. And it actually was just the coolest thing, because at the same time that I was asking a lot of these identity questions of me, I think we needed to do that also for our family, that we had gotten married and had babies and moved to a house and lived in a neighborhood and had, our jobs. And it was like, we moved so quickly through that little phase of life that by the time we got to the point, we had 4 kids. Let's see, Ethan was our oldest and he was in 6th grade. So let's say he was like, I don't know, 12. So we had a 12, 10, 8, and 6-year-old. And we're like, gosh, we need to take a breath. Who are we as a family? What do we care about? How is our relationship just as the 6 of us? And so as amazing as the road trip was, because we traveled around the United States and we were gone for 4 months, and saw just every cool thing that we could imagine seeing in the United States. I think that the more important thing that God was doing for us was just resetting us as a family. Who are we? Allowing us to for my husband and I to look at each other and be like, okay, we have some issues that it's easy to dismiss because our life was moving so quickly, but now there's nowhere to run. And it's literally the 2 of us with no distraction. So let's maybe start kind of uncovering some of these things. So yeah, it was a beautiful trip on so many levels, but really, I think actually this time during COVID has done that, I think, for a lot of families, where it has forced this slowdown. And my prayer has been so much that God would use this time. Hopefully we're kind of coming out of it now, but I hope that over the last year, I hope that he used that time to wake us up to some of the things that we look to for value and meaning that are not ours. That's not what they're there for. So that's what the road trip did for us, really.
So good. I think that we could all use that. I think, and I'm sure you and your husband had some conversations. Is he good at processing with you, or are you more of an internal processor?
I'm an internal processor and I love to journal, and Ryan is a verbal processor. And so,
okay.
Yeah, it is interesting, but we were just able to talk so much, and really, I think it was like uncovering things that have taken us years to get to. So it wasn't like everything was like we talked about it and then it was resolved in those 4 months. Like, this is a process, and some of it is just inviting it to happen in the timing that it's going to happen in.
Oh, so good. Okay, finally, before we finish, because there's so many, I took so many notes from your book, and I just hope everyone can read it. But will you inspire us with your 40 by 40 list, which it's too late for me now, but somebody listening, I love what you have done, and then tell us about your 40th birthday.
Okay. I decided, so one of the things that I learned about myself is that I had kind of fallen asleep to who I am. And not in a like godly dying to self way, because I think there's a difference between that and between just like dismissing who you are and just taking on the desires of everyone else around you. I think young moms get trapped into that a lot, but I think in particular, my personality type, it was just something that became really important to me to figure out, what do I like and what do I care about? And how can I pursue some of those things, not for any other reason, but just because they sound like they would be fun for me to do. And so I wrote a list of 40 things that I wanted to do before I turned 40. The thing about it is,
were you when you wrote this list?
39.
How old?
Okay,
39. So you had a year. Okay.
Yeah, so I had a year. So I gave myself a year to do it. And they were not like, some of them were like, start wearing earrings, because I also don't wear a lot of jewelry, or bake sourdough bread, or
sure, doable.
Go to bar class. So they were not difficult things to do. They were just things that were just for me. Like, no one else cares if I wear earrings or not. It's just something that maybe I want to wear. So that's where I'm like, you might be 50, but you could do, and you don't even have to do 40 things or 51 things before you're 51. It's just like choosing a few things. The heart behind it is, what is it like? What are the things that make you come alive, and how could you do a little bit more of it? Because I do actually think that's a really good way to honor who God made you. And so learning who that is and what you care about, and then participating in life in a way that actually brings God glory, because you're honoring who he made you to be. So,
okay. I just love that. And I want to hang out there for just a second, because I do hear from so many women who say, I don't even know what my thing is. All I've done is maybe they have a job that's just more, a place they go to work. But otherwise, I take care of my kids, my husband. I've kind of lost who I am. And I think that this might be a great practice because telling somebody how to figure out who they are, that's hard. Like, I don't even know where
Yeah.
to start. But if you say,
Yeah.
okay, right now, grab a pen and paper and start writing some things you would like to do in the next year, if just for you, I think that forces us to uncover our true heart's desires. And I love that you say this is all about who God wired you to be, because he's going to give you different desires than me. And I just think it's a great practice. So I just loved that you did that. So
Well,
now
part of
carry
it,
on.
another part of it is that paying attention. Pay attention to the things that you really like, that make you happy, that make you come
Yep.
alive. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you love to look at the ocean, or do you love to be in the mountains, or do you like to be
Mm-hmm.
inside, or
Yep.
I mean, there was one point, I didn't write about it in the book, but there was this one moment where I went off to upstairs for a few minutes. And when I came back down, Ryan was like, "Where'd you go?" And I was like, I needed to just write a list of things that I like doing. And this was separate than the 40 by 40 list of things that I wanted to do. This was like, what do I like doing? I didn't actually know what
Mm-hmm.
I liked doing.
Yeah.
And so my
Yep.
criteria for it was, if someone told me you could never do this thing again, would you be sad about it? And so maybe I asked the listener, think of things that if someone told you you could never do this thing again, you'd be like, man, I really miss that. Because I was a little surprised on my list. I had spent 10 years blogging. And at that point, I had done a lot of crafts. And I was like, you know what? If someone told me I could never do another craft again, I would be okay with that. And
Mm.
maybe I'm doing a lot of crafts because that's what people are really expecting of me, but
Whoa.
maybe that's not
Wow.
actually what I want to do. And so
Interesting. Yeah.
I wrote out my list and I came back down, and Ryan asked, like, where were you? And I said, oh, I was just writing a list of things that I like doing. And I'll tell you, he named off probably 90% of those things, even to like, Emily, you like watering your plants. And I was like, I do like watering my plants. And that's on there.
Ah.
So it wasn't like it was a mystery to anyone else. And so if you are struggling with like, what do I like doing? Maybe ask the people closest to you, what are the things that you see me doing that you think I really like? Because they might be insightful for you. But
So good.
it was just really helpful for me to have that list of like, oh yeah, these are the things I like to do. And if my day is not, if I don't have, I mean, especially when you have little kids, you don't have a ton of time to do things that you really love doing, but could you do a couple of them? Like, if you really love reading a book, then turn off the TV, even though
Mhm.
that's what's normal and easy. Turn off the TV
Mhm.
and read a book instead. Or if you really love watering your plants, go to the grocery store and buy a new plant, and then you can water it. So little dumb things that you can just add into your day that bring delight, because don't you think God wants us to live like that?
Yes, 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 yes. Amen to all of that. I love it. And I think it's good too to ask the question, because as I was reading, I had some conversations with my husband, and I was like, how many of the things do I do because they're expected of me, or because I'm just trying to please everybody else? How many things do I do in a day that are just because it fills me up? And I know the more we are filled, the more we're able to serve and love those in our lives. And so I just think it's a great conversation. Okay, so then take us to your 40th birthday, and I won't keep you all day, though I could.
Oh, but I love it. On my 40th birthday, I had been going through this journey for it had taken me about 5 years from Rwanda to my 40th birthday. And it was a lot of letting go of difficult things in my life, like comparison and distraction and busyness, and just kind of learning how to surrender, and then being filled back up with, who is God actually? Who is Jesus actually? There were some practices that I did to just help me like reframe, why do I trust so much in my own self and not in Jesus? Even though I say that I'm a believer, but yet I'm not actually relying on him. So it was this very long process. By the time I hit my 40th birthday, I had actually, and it's not in the book just because it felt like a really special moment that didn't need to be written about, but I had a really incredible time of prayer with one of my girlfriends um, who really walked me through some of this kind of inner healing that I
Mhm.
think really needed to happen in me. And so while it's not in the book, it is something that I will so avidly say, ask people for prayer, and be okay with God healing things in a spiritual sense that just doesn't make sense. So that was a huge thing that happened just a couple of days before my 40th birthday. For my 40th birthday, we went to Hawaii again, which 5 years earlier I had sat on a beach asking the Lord, like, who am I? Why am I so unsatisfied? And so 5 years later, I sat again on the beach and I finally kind of received those answers where it's like, oh, this is who I am. And the very final one and I actually wrote it down in my journal, but the very final one was, I am okay just as I am. And I think that was that's the most important thing. And it's not, I am okay just as I am because of me. It's, I am okay just as I am because of Christ. And so finally coming to a point in my faith and in my life where I could say, okay, I can accept myself for who I am and be okay with sometimes disappointing people and be okay with pale skin and be okay with, the gifts and talents that I have, and then using those things and calling myself an artist. I can be okay with that because none of it's really about me. It's actually because it's because of God, and He is good, and God is good and I am loved. And because of that, now I can just move through my life and I don't have to be so stressed out all the time about figuring out what my value is. So it was really quite a miracle. I feel like it was a long process, but that was my 40th birthday. And then 10 days later, after we'd been home, I heard Him say, it's time to write. It's time to write is what He said. And as I was walking down the stairs, I hear it's time to write. I got down to my computer and I opened up my computer, and an editor who I had talked with months and months before, who I decided I was not ready to write a book, she emailed me and said, hey, is it time for you to write?
Stop.
And that was on the same day. So that is how Freely and Lightly came about. I had never intended on writing this book. It was just the Lord took me through a time that I think a lot of people go through. And I hope that I'm able to put language to it that feels so welcoming to you, and that you might find yourself in that story. And that, and so He asked me to write it down. And so I did. So that's that book.
What a story.
There you go.
What a story.
Yes.
No, and I think from reading it that you've accomplished that completely, and anyone who reads it is going to be ministered to. So thank you for being brave and willing to share the journey and make it available to everyone. Well, I'm going to point people to the book and to where they can find and follow you in our show notes. You also have some things available as far as art goes. Can you tell us both how people can follow you right now, and also tell us a little bit about some of that, so those who are interested might be able to try?
Yeah. One of the things that I think I want to do is always offer delight and encouragement, and maybe some practical tools for how do we kind of renew our mind? And one of those things are these little scripture cards. So there's 31, it has a little piece of art and then a daily scripture. So you can read one each day. And I just feel like it's a really beautiful and practical way to get truth into our lives. So those are called Truth for Today cards. And I also sell artwork, and I have some really cute little watercolor workbooks if you want to learn how to watercolor. All of that stuff is at emilylex.com.
Awesome. And on Instagram,
Instagram is, no, I'm Emily Lex Studio. Someone else has Emily Lex. I don't know.
Don't you love that?
No, I don't love that.
I know. Same here. I've got some Monica Swanson out there that doesn't post anything, but
I know.
It happens. It happens. Okay. Well, we're going to link to all of that. The scripture cards, beautiful, just so many good things. And people like you are a little frustrating because you are both an incredible artist, but also such a beautiful writer. And, we're not comparing here, but
no.
You got the gifts. You got them. So well done.
Thank you.
Yes.
I know. It's who knew that I was going to be writing and illustrating books? I had no idea.
Right. And I do hope and pray that those listening know that that's, that God has a different story for each of us. But I love that He surprises and delights and inspires us in different seasons in new ways. So what a fun story. I'm encouraged. I can't wait to meet you in person. So
I know.
Thank you.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. It's been such an encouragement to me.
You're welcome.
Okay. Aloha. All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Emily, and I just adored her. We didn't get to meet when she was in Hawaii, so I'm going to track her down next time I'm in Gig Harbor and hope to hang out with her because I just am so inspired by everything that she shared, and I hope you were too. So be sure to go over to show notes to grab links to her book and all the places you can find and follow her. And I just want to thank you so much for being here and being a part of this podcast community, even in the midst of a busy summer. Also wanted to remind you that the Christian Parenting Donor Drive ends this Friday. So be sure to go over. You can text CP Give to 474747 or visit cpgive.org and offer a donation to Christian Parenting to help support the Boy Mom podcast. Thank you all so much again. I have more great episodes in the next few weeks. You're going to love my guests so much. We've got a really good variety coming up to end our summer strong. So tell your friends about the Boy Mom podcast. Come back soon. And until next time, aloha.